Gaming phones are simply they're beasts. The RedMagic 8 Pro has the highest end Qualcomm processor, more RAM than just about all the competitors out there, and a battery that just hits tablet territory. It also weighs a ton and has a huge freaking footprint. So, what type of person should buy this phone? Let's find out. If you do a lot of mobile gaming, then you've probably come across this annoyance that we have for mobile gaming on smartphones. This is especially true for Korean gacha games, which I do love playing. You get ensnared into the whole process of like doing your missions, you gotta farm for the gems, until your phone runs burning hot and your battery is fully drained. This leaves you then stranded for the rest of the day without any juice on your phone. Gaming phones like the RedMagic 8 Pro, though, have a built-in fan that cools the system. There are two different fan speeds that exude air through the slots on parallel sides of the phone's frame. The fan also automatically turns on if the phone is in its gaming mode that you can then toggle through a switch on the phone's frame. I did find the cooling system to be quite effective when toggled to the highest setting. It does a pretty good job of making the phone more tolerable to hold for long periods of time. This does come with a downside, as the fan does push out like a rather loud noise. The phone's speakers need to kind of be at almost full output to cover up the fan's noise. It's still quite noticeable even at 75% volume for the audio. Speaking of the speakers, though, I was quite impressed with the actual clarity and loudness that comes from this dual setup. Sound comes out of the top and the bottom of the frame for some of the best loudspeaker audio I've heard in quite a long time. With that Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 processor, 12GB of RAM, and 256GB of storage on my black model, one would expect top-end performance from the 8 Pro. And I'm happy to report that the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 does in fact give the gaming phone an impressive chip to play with. The phone ships with Android 13 skinned with RedMagic's OS 6. RedMagic's Android skin falls in line with just about like every other Chinese OEM skin. There are themes and additional features that may or may not tickle your fancy depending on how much customization you like on your phone. I like options, even though my phone is currently configured pretty much like a stock Android phone would. With this powerhouse processor, though, navigation through the phone's interface is fluid and responsive as one would expect from this processor. So then let's talk about gaming, since this is, I think, first and foremost what most people would buy this for. It's a gaming console. As expected, this will provide flagship performance for just about every Android game on the Play Store. It will handle every game at variable settings, but I really haven't come across one that was not playable and enjoyable in one capacity or another. As the gaming phone moniker normally entails, we do have dual pressure sensitive shoulder triggers on the right side of the frame. They have a reaction of 520 Hz upon release. I remember these types of built-in shoulder triggers flooding the phone market during the PUBG mobile era. I don't know if people still play those games, but I've since found them to be nice programmable buttons for like MOBAs and RPG games with a lot of skill loads. I prefer using a attachable controller, but it is nice to have a built-in option for when you don't have that. In addition to the triggers, RedMagic has this gaming mode with a ridiculous amount of like hacks to kind of improve your mobile gaming experience. From key mapping to even having an anime girl assistant who can essentially serve as like your VTuber avatar when you do your streaming. There's a lot of things to explore here. In fact, some of the features are less useful than others, but PC gamers might actually feel right at home with the amount of customization you can do. I personally have not used a gaming phone with this much added functionality before. It is a little overwhelming to learn exactly what every setting can do. I think a lot of people interested in buying this phone would be to use it for emulation of retro systems. At least that was one of the first things that crossed my mind when I saw this device. To get straight to the point, everything on the PS2 should work exceptionally well. We've gotten to this point where 8-bit up to like 32-bit games have really stabilized in the marketplace to replicate these systems nearly flawlessly. The Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 can play GameCube titles and Wii titles pretty nicely as well. Here's Mario Kart Double Dash, and it ran without a hitch here. Even sweeter, new Super Mario Bros. Wii did just as well. I've had trouble with that later one on some other devices before. That's a good sign for emulation on here. Over on Aether SX2, both Gran Turismo 4 and Shadow of Colossus actually played admirably with only minor hiccups. I was able to get sustainable like 60 frames per second with the occasional drop to 30 frames per second for a second or two. I think that's plenty playable when considering that this is essentially a portable console. GameCube, Wii, and PS2 are essentially where the bulk of console gaming is capable of on Android right now, so it does it well here. When you add in that gigantic 6,000 milliamp hour battery into the fold, it does make a lot of sense to potentially use this as your gaming emulation system. I'll be blunt, even while gaming intensively for like a prolonged period of time, it was pretty difficult to fully drain the battery in one single sitting, in one single day. I mean, I managed to do it a couple of times, running Tower of Fantasy nonstop for hours with the fan on. I managed to do it also again with Aether SX2 in about like 4 to 5 hours of nonstop gaming. Everything else barely scratched the surface of the longevity that the battery pack can provide. On a regular business day with 2 Korean gacha games, doing farming sessions for gyms added in, I'm regularly ending the night with about 50% left on the charge. That's about 3 total hours of these mobile games on top of my normal work usage for the phone. When I dwindle that down to only one of these Korean mobile games to do these chores, I don't know why I do this to myself, I can easily pull off 2 days on one charge. Without any gaming at all, it's conceivable for the RedMagic 8 Pro to pull off multiple days without using the plug. It's ironic then that we're kind of approaching that tablet battery life because for all intents and purposes, this phone is like a tablet. In fact, it's just about the same length as the Razer Edge tablet that I'm concurrently reviewing right now. The display is a lofty 6.8 inches of AMOLED goodness, even though the resolution is only a full HD. With a 20:9 aspect ratio that pushes the pixel count up to 400 ppi flat, it definitely isn't the sharpest nor the most visually appealing screen. But it does compensate by having a 120Hz refresh rate, which is a must for gaming phones. The viewing angles are good, and the colors are reputable for a gaming platform experience. I don't think they're anything special, but they do the job well. Under that Corning Gorilla Glass 5 panel lies a fingerprint sensor that works well enough. It isn't super fast, nor will you get into your phone on the first attempt every single time, but I didn't have a lot to whine about with this. It just works. Also under that display is a 16 megapixel f2.0 selfie camera sensor. Combine that with 3 rear cameras that include a 50 megapixel f1.9 wide, an 8 megapixel f2.2 ultra wide, and a 2 megapixel f2.4 macro lens. I'm not going to judge too harshly because nobody really buys a gaming phone expecting great photography production. Like a lot of Chinese phones out there, RedMagic relies a lot on like their, I would say, over processing, because a lot of the results, this phone gives photos either too harsh or too soft of a definition. I mean, you've kind of experienced it if you've used a Chinese phone with the whole beauty mode, and HDR just doesn't hit right. So it's varying definitions of quality there in how they process it. The phone does a pretty decent job, though, of auto-focusing onto focal points, even in macro situations, so that wasn't too bad for me. The RedMagic 8 Pro actually did surprise me in some low-light situations. In my home studio with my studio lights off, I actually thought the RedMagic 8 Pro did pretty well with capturing the level of detail while keeping the exposure relatively close to reality. I thought it did pretty good. In other situations, though, it struggles. That's a good overall assessment of what the 8 Pro provides. It's an unbalanced experience. All we really needed was just a consistency with a gaming phone, and I would say that's plenty enough for a gaming phone. However, we just fell short right here, just a little short. I also ran into some connectivity issues with LTE and 5G here, even though this is an unlocked phone for the global market. This isn't my first unlocked RedMagic phone, so I've seen this before. Some spots around the city here where I should have service would drop out when my SIM is in this phone. So I like that ZTE has a dual nano SIM tray, but it's also a bummer that that tray can't be used for a micro SD card because there's no micro SD card support on this phone. This detracts from being a perfect emulation console, as you would have to store all the files internally right now. I truly believe that all phones that market themselves as gaming oriented should have micro SD card expansion as a default. It just makes more sense. While I'm bringing up the negatives, there's no Qi charging, but that's to be expected for something like this. This phone is literally also like a brick. It's shaped in a perfect rectangle with sharp edges leading to the aluminum frame. It feels nice and cool to hold in the hand thanks to that aluminum and glass combination, but there is no doubt that this is a bulky phone. To put it into context, I do have a difficult time bending down and tying my shoelaces with the RedMagic in my pocket. Basically, it's not a very portable smartphone. That's a bit funny to say, but I did find myself setting this phone down onto a desk or a table whenever I sat down, and I normally don't do that, so that is saying something. From a sheer value standpoint, the RedMagic 8 Pro is extremely competitive. It has all the spec numbers to match up with the best out there in terms of pure performance. I love the distinct look that the RGB strip on the rear of the phone emits, because it also shows an easy classification that this is a gaming peripheral. I love the thoughtful placement of the resources along the frame of the RedMagic 8 Pro as well. It's a terrifically designed piece of work. If the phone was slightly more ergonomically friendly to hold and a little bit more reliable in the connectivity aspect of a smartphone, I would have considered this to maybe even be the perfect option for a budget-savvy buyer. You have to kind of know what RedMagic is to buy this phone. Most people don't know what this brand is. As is, though, the RedMagic 8 Pro is probably still best kept in the hands of people addicted to mobile gaming that need a long-lasting phone to keep up with their all-day farming for gems. It's an addiction.
So the other day, I was on a Zoom call at work, and I just dropped everything I was saying, and I told them, subscribe.